So, Alyssa, what's on your radar?
Late last week, Ohio Congressman and former Ohio State football legend Anthony Gonzalez announced he would not seek re-election for his U.S. House seat. He was one of 10 Republicans to vote for Donald Trump's second impeachment and faced a steep primary challenge from a Trump-backed primary opponent, Max Miller. Congressman Gonzalez's stated reasons for not battling through an ugly primary and fighting for another term made almost too much sense. He's young, he's successful, he has a beautiful family, he's had stardom, he doesn't need it. He wanted to serve his country in Congress. He did, as a pragmatic conservative leader for a few terms, and now, facing either having to run so far to the right he'd alienate the vast majority of the country, or run a smart, steady campaign against Miller and get his personal life, character, and family attacked, he chose to do the normal human thing, which, by the way, is so rare in politics. He decided to forego running for re-election. And Trump world was thrilled. The former president released two separate statements, one calling Gonzalez a rhino, another saying simply, 1 down, 9 to go, presumably talking about defeating all Republicans who voted for his impeachment. All of which raises a fundamental question that's plagued the GOP in recent years. Will loyalty tests above all else become the only thing that matters in the party? And if loyalty to one man, who couldn't win re-election, is our only barometer for someone's credibility as a Republican, do we stand for anything at all? Listen, I'm an old school conservative, the type that believes first and foremost in the Constitution. I believe in limited government and federalism. My instincts are borderline libertarian, except I believe in a robust but accountable national defense. But that hardly defines the Republican Party as of late. Now, I can think of no less conservative concept than loyalty to one man being a litmus test into the conservative club. Conservatism is built on a healthy dose of skepticism of all elected leaders, the notion that people should truly govern. We know what's best for ourselves, for our communities, and for our families. We also know that the role of elected members, whether in Congress or the White House, should be limited and scrutinized by checks and balances. And let's face it, much of the former president's issue with these individuals is that they refuse to buy into his time and time disproven myth that he actually won the election and there was some sort of widespread fraud and conspiracy to help Joe Biden win. Listen, I worked for Trump. I voted for him. I liked about 85% of his policies, and I wanted him to win. But he didn't, plain and simple. And it's time he and his people start being honest with the American public about it. And by the way, it's been 10 months since Trump lost the election. His teams of lawyers have had all the time in the world to prove this widespread fraud. But despite antics in a few states, Arizona and Georgia among them, they have all but given up. And even if those far-fetched efforts did yield non-existent evidence of widespread fraud, it's time the former president realized that wouldn't be close enough to sway the outcome of the election. But this past week, it basically went unnoticed that the former president bizarrely sent a letter to the Georgia Secretary of State asking him to decertify the election results. If Democrats were doing this, my party would be calling it out as madness. Now, I've been a conservative for a long time. I've been a Republican longer than Donald Trump. I believe that conservatives can and should be willing to critique their own party when they stray away from their core values. I can think of few things less in line with our values than trying to undo the democratic process. And a horrifying side effect of the Trump era is a fealty to elected leaders that comes before all else. January 6th was the most obvious example. Republicans are the party of the Constitution. At least we claim to be. What could fly more in the face of the Constitution than believing that one man has the right to overturn the votes of the majority of the country, or undo any legal voters' votes for that matter? That is totalitarianism. I know there was a lot of anger around the election and no shortage of disinformation and misinformation. But one thing should have been clear to anyone, left, right, or center. No one person has any right to undo the elected will of the majority of Americans. We need more Republicans who are willing to break with party leadership in Congress or anywhere else, not fewer. I personally will be sad to see Anthony Gonzalez go. Ryan, as a Democrat, I would love your take on this.
I'm actually only a registered Democrat because it's the only way you can vote in D.C. in like local elections. I think the Democratic Party is pretty wretched most of the time. But yes, you're right that like Trump is, his particular personality foibles just so perfectly match the moment. there has never been a time in history where a one-term president was able to maintain such control over his over the party after losing. The party typically, Hoover, Carter, they just run out of town. Hoover would be allowed to speak at conventions, and Democrats loved it every time because they could remind Republicans, remember that guy? Democrats love when Trump is elevated now, except he's the leader of the party, not just a clown like Hoover who just kept showing up to conventions. The only way he can get away with that is by pretending that he won. And perpetuating this mass delusion.
Right, and that's a very good point. That's what I'm struck by, as someone who's worked in Republican parties for quite some time. I've never seen such a rallying of continued support behind someone who lost. Like Mitt Romney, great guy. After he lost, we kind of just, tossed him aside. He could show up at GOP events, but he was hardly the standard bearer for the party. We weren't deciding who deserved to be in Congress based on how much Mitt Romney signed off on them. And I'm just sort of taken aback. It's something that, ideologically, I have a hard time wrapping my head around, that it isn't about your voting record. It is about how in line you are with this one individual. And another example of it was the Liz Cheney kerfuffle when she was kicked out of House leadership. Somebody who has a distinctly conservative voting record by all accounts, and was replaced by someone, Elise Stefanik, a good member of Congress, but who's distinctly less conservative than her. But the one barometer that mattered is she's more loyal to Donald Trump.
Right.
And it's fascinating because how policy actually that's made in Congress is going to come out is it's not going to be based on your loyalty to Donald Trump. It's your policy positions. But that apparently didn't matter to folks.
Right. And that doesn't work long term. If you organize your entire politics around a person, once that person is gone, your politics are then completely disorganized.
I regularly remind people there will be a world where Donald Trump is not the center of our lives, and it's actually not too far away. And Ryan, I look forward to what's on your radar next.